So many people seems to be struggling with eliminating negative thoughts. For most people, they're consumed by their pattern thinking. And even it's been said that 90% of the thoughts you think today, you thought yesterday, and 70% of them are negative. So in this video, I'm gonna be sharing with you why people think negative thoughts and where it stems from, how it's being formed, the habitual pattern, and also what is stopping most people from getting out of that habitual loop that they seem to be trapped by. So let's begin by how this negative thinking is formed. So this is not something that I heard from anybody or I did a research. It's just this accumulation of my experience and studies that I have been. And I think there are two main reasons that people have formed a habituated negative thinking pattern. Now, the first reason is that it is actually a nature in our biological essential nature. So what that means is that we are spiritual being, but at the same time, we are animal creatures. So we have this biology that is being operated in the system to function, right? And the nature of biology, the nature of animal biology is survival. So this is sort of like a psychology 101. When you look at the brain structure, you have the neocortex at the top, the limbic system in the middle, and the reptilian brain at the bottom. So there's three layers. And the top layer, neocortex, is where you use your intellectual capacity to discern, to analyze all the cognitive stuff, right? And the middle layer is the limbic system, which we also call emotional brain. Although emotion is all over the body, not only in the brain, is a place that we interpret and then experience emotion. And at the bottom, which is the seat of the instinct, which is the animal brain. So the way in which the biology is wired is that when you see some evidence in the 3D physical world, in the external world, what responds immediately or even react immediately is your reptilian brain. So you have this immediate instinct when there's some sort of threat coming from the outside. You start having that reactivity in the instinct that informs the limbic system, which is your emotion. You create an emotion related to fear. And then way later, your cognition, the ability to analyze and understand, start understanding what it was that was happening. So until that happens at the neocortex level, your body start reacting first, and your mind that thinks doesn't know why it's reacting, and you are in that environment, right? So it's interesting because humans have an ability to discern and then create our own environment. This is, one of my mentors used to say, all the other creatures like animals, nature, trees are blend in to the whole ecosystem, right? But humans have the ability to distinguish themselves away from the natural world. So what that really means is that you and I have this ability to think thoughts disconnecting from the outside environment. Yeah. So, and that ability is useful when we know how to use it, but then that also an ability that makes us think stressful thoughts, that makes us worry about the future, that makes us think about the past. Because when you look at let's say if you have a your dog is not thinking, worrying about what you are gonna tell the dog tomorrow, right? And it's interesting because I recently read, I think I was watching the podcast, and somebody was saying that, babies don't stress because babies don't have the ability and capacity to think and project future, but also babies do not have enough experience that gives them a feedback or preparing for that outside threat. But as we begin experiencing life year after year, we have different experiences, positive, negatives, pleasure, pain. And when we have some sort of psychological pain, for instance, what are the psychological pains? One of them could be, you felt like you were judged by somebody who you thought was an important person, and you took it personally, and then you start creating this biological wiring system inside that you don't want to feel judged again in the future. So that information gets stored in a memory bank, and then you become very sensitive about that, right? But what happens next time when something happens is that you have this information stored in the subconscious, and the instincts start kicking in and give you this emotional fear-based experience, and you start feeling all those energy that leads you to think negative thoughts. So the more people age, the more people seems to be cautious because they have had experience of experiencing psychological pain. Therefore, their biology inside of them start getting wired. I mean, it's both, right? People gain experience, so they have this ability to change perspective, but at the same time, nobody wants to feel the psychological pain, such as not getting approved or being judged or being told something that hurt something inside, right? So both start developing at the same time, and then we become cautious about it. And when we become cautious about the outside 3D world, the biology start kicking in and makes you think negative thoughts, because when you think negative thoughts, you are preparing yourself from the possible outside threat that might appear in the future time zone. Does that make sense? So the biology that we are wired makes us think negative thoughts, because when we think thoughts that is negative, you are prepared to get ready for any danger to protect yourself from. So the survival mechanism is also can be called a protective mechanism, right? Sometimes people call this ego, right? Ego is not a bad thing. Sometimes in the spiritual practices, people think that we need to let go of the ego. I come from this perspective that we need both to be able to balance the essence soul of who you are, which doesn't know any fear, but pure love, pure peace, pure ease and freedom. And ego is an ability, and ego could be called identity, right? You're playing a certain role. And when you play a certain role, because we live in this 3D relative realm, you want to have some distinction between you and somebody else. That is identity. Identity is formed through relationship. So you wouldn't be somebody without the existence of somebody else. Let's say if you're a mother, you can only be a mother when you have a child, right? Now, every single one of us, including myself, anybody who is watching or listening to this, has a mother that you were born, otherwise you wouldn't come here, right? So that's a relationship, but that relationship shapes your identity. You are a child of your mother. You can never get away from that identity if you arrive on this earth plane as a human form, right? So the identity and how we perceive shapes the sense of self, and that creates an anchor of how we see the world. So biological wiredness is one reason that we tend to think negative thoughts. I hope that makes sense. The second reason is something that I also share a little bit in other video of imagination and subconscious mind. Now, this is very important. So when we come to this earth plane, right, and then when we get thrown into this physical world, babies, you and I were full subconscious. Now, what that really means is that you didn't form a conscious awareness to be able to think, to be able to accept or reject information. When the subconscious mind is fully open, the nature of subconscious mind is that subconscious mind only knows how to accept. So some of you might have heard hypnosis, right? When you get to a hypnotic state, you're letting go of your conscious mind. So somebody who is leading the hypnosis can tell the person who is receiving, and the receiver just do whatever the giver is sane because your conscious mind is fully let go. Yeah. And each and every one of us, until the age of 6 and 7, we were fully open, the subconscious was fully open. So what that really means is that you are absorbing all the energetics, information, emotions, habitual thinking pattern tendency from your parents, from your surrounding, from your everybody who you are surrounded by. Even when you are in your mother's womb, and if your mother had a tendency of worrying about something, even though you didn't know language and the concept in your mind, you are receiving that energy as a feeling tone. Then what happens is that when you get to adult teenager, your subconscious mind is filled with all those information. Some of them are serving you. Sometimes people have this confidence in nature, but it's not in nature. You received it, right? Or other part is that people have this tendency of thinking negatively or feeling discouraged or not having confidence. Those traits are something that we received when we were little. And when we get to adult, that shows up as a behavior, but it's nested in your subconscious mind. So let's say if you had a tendency, many people, most people are not aware, right? Not aware of this biological pattern that I just explained. So most people just kind of think negative thoughts to protect themselves from the outside threat. Then, if you are surrounded by those people when you were being raised, you receive that tendency inside of you. Then when you get to adult, on top of thinking that way, being led by that biological tendency, you now have this created a pattern of thinking those thoughts because that pattern is stored in your subconscious mind and it's being given by your surrounding. Yeah. So those are the two main reasons that stuck out for me. Yes, stood out for me to really share why people think negatively almost all the time, right? It takes a little bit of effort for people to not to think that way. Yeah. Now, I want to talk about why people are stuck there, right? Now, one reason is that people are not aware of what I just said. So if people are not aware of what I just said, until you become aware of something, it's almost like you're inside of the bubble, yeah, of that concept. So if you are inside of the concept, you cannot understand where you are, right? If you are in this bubble of this idea that makes you stuck, you're not going to be able to understand it. So the first step is to become aware of it, right? Now, but the reason that I think that many people are stuck in that place is because first, most of the environment that we're in also operates that way. So we tend to conform, right? So it's easier for people to do the thing that they are surrounded by. It's similar energy that they're surrounded by. But also, I want to talk about identity because identity is the sense of self. So let's say if you have been having a tendency to think negatively and you do not want that. You do not want that. As much as you don't want that, you might have been addicted to how you have been feeling. Many people want a different outcome, but they're not aware of how they are operating inside. So in order to change the outcome, we want to change what's inside of us. Then we want to be recognized what is that inside that's being shaped, right? So that's an identity. Identity is the composite of your thoughts and then feelings, emotions, and beliefs that you're operating from. So until we are able to step outside of those layers and begin examining your thoughts and feelings, emotions, and belief, you might be stuck inside of them. And then as long as you are stuck inside of them, you will continue to repeat the same thing because that is addictive, that is familiar. Yeah. Now, another layer of this conversation that I always love sharing is that It's very interesting. This is sort of the human tendency, right? Nobody wants to think negative thoughts. Nobody wants to feel a disempowering emotion. Yeah. But when you think and feel that, because it's familiar, you feel like you're somebody. You feel like you're somebody. I'm gonna slow down a little bit because this is very important. You do not want your negative thoughts that you are accustomed to think. You don't want your disempowered feeling and emotions or a sense of belief that is not serving you, that makes you feel limited, right? We don't want any of those. But when you think and feel and believe that way, it feels familiar. And because it feels familiar, we sort of slip back into that pocket, the pocket of identity, who you think you have been, who you feel you have been, how you have been believing yourself in this world. And what's interesting and rather fascinating is that when you have that at the subconscious level, you don't want that as a conscious awareness at the conscious level, but subconsciously you're seeking an external environment to be triggered to think those negative thoughts, to feel that disempowered feeling, to feel the limiting belief, because it feels familiar and it feels like when you're experiencing that, you feel like you're somebody. For the ego identity, what's most threatened is to not to feel like somebody. When you feel like you're nobody, your ego gets threatened. So you want to look for an environment, outside environment, to blame or judge or think something negatively to feel like that's somebody that you have been experiencing. Yeah, does that make sense? Now, until you step back, you might not be able to see it. But notice the tendency of how you tend to immediately react to something in the outside, even though you said that you don't want it. The last piece that I want to mention in this context is this idea that people tend to focus on the not wanting, right? So let's say if you don't want your negative thinking patterns that you have been experiencing. If I ask you, okay, what is it that you really want? And when I ask people that, most of the time, the answer to that question, people tell me and answer, I don't want this, this, and this. Yeah. And then I ask again, okay, what is it that you want then? And then the person pause and think a little bit and then answer, oh, this is happening, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this. I don't know if you notice this. I'm asking what is it that the person wants. The person continues to respond to me what they don't want. So it's almost like a blind spot for people that most people are focusing on not wanting something. Yeah, not wanting something, you're feeding the energy to not wanting. Yeah. So let's say if you have a tendency of if you have a tendency of thinking negative thoughts, that's what I meant. And then because it's not serving you, you start feeling like, oh, I don't want to think that way. I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to feel this limiting thing, right? But as long as you're focusing on not wanting that negative thought, you're putting energy to that not wanting land, not wanting garden, right? You're nourishing that. What you want to do is, okay, identify that is not what you want, but what is it that you really want instead? And begin laying out all the things that you want, right? So I want you to think of, okay, you have some negative thought. Okay, great that you just notice and are aware. Then what would you be thinking all the time? What are the type of thoughts? What are the feelings, emotions that you want to be immersed in? What kind of belief do you want to be stand on? What you want to be focusing on is what you want to focus on. Until that switch happens, you will never be able to make this not wanting fade away. But once you change to focusing on what is it that you do want, everything is going to change. I hope that helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.